The music in O'Malley's bar was loud enough to make conversation difficult, which was exactly what Sarah needed. She sat alone at the far end of the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey that she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been trained to notice everything. The dim lighting cast shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the alert intensity in her dark eyes. To everyone else in the bar, she looked like just another woman having a drink after a long day. Her jeans and black sweater were unremarkable, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had chosen this appearance carefully, blending into the crowd of office workers and locals who filled the popular downtown establishment every evening. What they couldn't see were the hours of combat training that had sculpted her lean frame, or the small scar above her left eyebrow from a mission in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Sarah Martinez had been undercover for 6 weeks now, and tonight was supposed to be the night everything came together. Her target was Marcus Chen, a defense contractor who had been selling classified information to foreign buyers. The intelligence suggested he would be meeting his contact here tonight, in this very bar, to hand over documents that could compromise national security. Sarah's job was to identify the contact, gather evidence of the transaction, and signal for backup to move in. She checked her watch discreetly. 8:30 p.m. Chen should arrive any minute. The door opened, letting in a burst of cool October air along with a group of laughing college students. Sarah's eyes flicked toward the entrance, then returned to her drink. Still no Chen. She had memorized every detail of his photograph during her briefing, studied his habits and preferences. The man was punctual to a fault, which meant something might be wrong. "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" Sarah looked up to find a man standing beside the empty stool next to her. He was tall, probably 6'2", with sandy brown hair and blue eyes that seemed friendly enough. His smile was confident but not aggressive, and he wore a navy blue button-down shirt with khakis that suggested he worked in an office somewhere nearby. Everything about him screamed ordinary, which immediately put Sarah on guard. In her line of work, ordinary people often turned out to be anything but. "Go ahead," she said, her voice neutral. She needed to maintain her cover, and turning away a friendly stranger would attract unwanted attention. "Thanks." He slid onto the stool and signaled the bartender. "Pretty busy tonight." "It usually is." Sarah kept her responses short, hoping he would take the hint and leave her alone. She couldn't afford distractions tonight, not when everything depended on catching Chen in the act. The man ordered a beer and turned slightly toward her. "I'm David, by the way." "David Reynolds." "Lisa," Sarah replied, using the cover identity she had established over the past weeks. She had an entire backstory prepared, complete with a job at a local marketing firm and an apartment across town that had been set up by her handlers. "Nice to meet you, Lisa. You come here often?" It was such a classic pickup line that Sarah almost smiled despite herself. "Sometimes," she said, glancing toward the door again. "Where was Chen?" David followed her gaze. "Waiting for someone?" "Maybe." Sarah took a small sip of her whiskey, using the motion to check her watch again. 8:40. Chen was never late. "Ah, the mysterious type. I like that." David's tone was playful, but something in his eyes had shifted. Sarah caught it immediately, that subtle change from casual interest to something more calculating. Her training kicked in, every sense suddenly heightened. "I wouldn't say mysterious," she replied carefully. "Just not much of a talker." "That's okay. I talk enough for 2 people." David took a long drink of his beer, then set it down with a satisfied sigh. "So what do you do for work, Lisa?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Sarah noticed how intently he waited for her answer. "Marketing," she said. "Pretty boring stuff." "I doubt anything about you is boring." There it was again, that shift in his demeanor. The friendly facade was still there, but underneath it Sarah sensed something else. Predatory. Dangerous. She started to calculate her options. Her backup team was positioned outside, waiting for her signal. Her service weapon was concealed beneath her sweater, easily accessible if needed. The exit routes were clear in her mind, mapped out during her initial surveillance of the location. But she couldn't blow her cover, not without knowing where Chen was and whether this man beside her was connected to the operation somehow. "You're very kind," she said, offering him a small smile. "What about you? What line of work are you in?" "Consulting," David replied smoothly. "I help companies solve problems they can't handle themselves." The answer was vague enough to be suspicious, but before Sarah could probe further, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it discreetly and felt her heart rate spike. It was from her handler, Chen, spotted entering rear entrance. "Contact made. Proceed with caution." Sarah's mind raced. Chen had come in through the back, which meant he was already here somewhere, probably in one of the private booths she couldn't see from her position at the bar. She needed to move, but David was watching her every expression with those unnervingly alert eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked. "You look like you just got bad news." "Just work stuff," Sarah said, starting to stand. "I should probably head out." "So soon?" "But we were just getting to know each other." David's hand moved casually to rest on her arm, but Sarah felt the firmness of his grip. Not quite restraining her, but close. "Why don't you stay for one more drink?" "I'll buy." Every instinct Sarah had developed over years of special operations was screaming danger. This wasn't just some guy trying to pick her up in a bar. There was something calculated about his approach, something that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. But she couldn't be sure, and making the wrong move could compromise everything. "Maybe another time," she said, gently but firmly removing her arm from his grip. "I really do need to go." "Are you sure? The night is still young." David's smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold. "Besides, I think your friend might be disappointed if you left early." Sarah's blood chilled. "What friend?" "The one you were waiting for." "Marcus, isn't it?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her cover was blown, but how? She had been so careful, so thorough in building her identity. "Unless." "I don't know anyone named Marcus," she said, but even as the words left her mouth she knew it was useless. David's smile widened, becoming something predatory and cruel. "Come now, Lisa. Or should I say, Agent Martinez? There's no point in pretending anymore." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon, but David was faster. His own hand shot out to grip her wrist, and she felt the unmistakable pressure of a gun barrel against her ribs, hidden beneath his jacket. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said conversationally. "We wouldn't want to cause a scene, would we? All these innocent people just trying to enjoy their evening." Sarah's mind was working frantically, analyzing the situation and her options. The bar was crowded, which made drawing her weapon risky even if she could reach it. Her backup team was outside, but they were watching for Chen, not for her to be compromised. She could try to signal them, but David seemed to anticipate her every thought. "Here's what's going to happen," David continued in that same casual tone. "We're going to walk very calmly to the back exit. You're going to smile and act like we're old friends heading out together. If you try anything clever, if you make any sudden movements or attempts to signal for help, I'll put a bullet in your spine before you can blink." "Who are you?" Sarah asked quietly. "Someone who's been watching you watch Marcus for the past 6 weeks. Did you really think your little operation was as secret as you believed?" David's laugh was soft but chilling. "Your government isn't the only one with eyes and ears everywhere, Agent Martinez." Sarah felt sick. If David had been watching her for 6 weeks, it meant the entire operation was compromised. Chen wasn't just selling secrets to foreign buyers, he was part of something much bigger, and now she had walked right into their trap. "Why?" she asked, playing for time while she tried to think of a way out. "Why what? Why did we let you run around playing spy for over a month?" "Because it was useful. You led us to your backup teams, your safe houses, your communication protocols. You've been very helpful, actually." The gun pressed harder against her ribs, and Sarah realized David was serious about using it. The bar was too crowded to risk a confrontation here, but once they got her outside, she would be completely at their mercy. "Shall we?" David asked pleasantly, as if he were asking her to dance. Sarah nodded slowly, her mind still racing through possibilities. She couldn't reach her weapon, couldn't signal her team, couldn't risk the lives of innocent civilians. But she wasn't helpless. Years of training had taught her that there was always another option, always another way to turn the tables. She just had to wait for the right moment. They stood up together, David keeping the gun pressed against her while maintaining the appearance of a friendly conversation. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple getting ready to leave together after a pleasant evening. David even left money on the bar to pay for their drinks, playing his part perfectly. They started walking toward the back of the bar, weaving between tables full of people who had no idea that a deadly game was playing out just feet away from them. Sarah's eyes swept the room one more time, looking for anything she could use to her advantage. The back exit was getting closer, and, once they reached it, her chances of survival would drop dramatically. That's when she saw him. Marcus Chen was sitting in a corner booth with another man she didn't recognize, a briefcase open on the table between them. The transaction was happening right now, just as her intelligence had predicted. The irony wasn't lost on her, she had found her target just as she was being led to what might be her execution. "Interesting, isn't it?" David murmured in her ear. "Marcus is quite efficient. Your government's secrets are probably changing hands as we speak." "It doesn't have to be like this," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever you're planning, there has to be another way." "Oh, but there isn't," David replied. "You see, Agent Martinez, you know too much. You've seen too much. The only question now is whether we make this quick and clean, or whether you force us to get creative." They were almost at the back exit now. Sarah could see the heavy metal door that led to the alley behind the bar. Once they went through that door, she would be completely isolated from any potential help. It was now or never. Sarah stumbled slightly, as if she had caught her toe on something. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it was enough to shift David's balance and create a tiny gap between his gun and her ribs. In that instant, she moved. Years of combat training took over. Sarah spun to her left, using her elbow to strike David's wrist and knock his gun hand away from her body. At the same time, she brought her knee up hard, aiming for his solar plexus. David grunted and staggered back, but he was faster than she had expected. His left hand shot out to grab her throat while his right hand fought to bring the gun back into position. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, his friendly mask finally dropping completely. Sarah grabbed his wrist with both hands, using her body weight to twist his arm and keep the gun pointed away from her. They struggled silently, both trying to avoid drawing attention from the crowded bar. But Sarah knew she was at a disadvantage. David was bigger and stronger, and he had backup somewhere nearby. She needed to end this quickly. Using a move she had learned in hand-to-hand combat training, Sarah suddenly reversed direction, pulling David off balance and using his own momentum against him. He stumbled forward, and she drove her knee up into his midsection with all the force she could muster. This time her blow connected solidly, and David doubled over with a gasp of pain. But he still held the gun, and as he fell forward, his finger tightened on the trigger. The weapon discharged with a muffled pop, the sound partially masked by the loud music. Sarah felt something hot graze her shoulder, and she realized she had been shot. The pain was sharp and immediate, but her training kicked in. She couldn't stop now, couldn't let David recover. She grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from a nearby table and brought it down hard on David's wrist. This time he cried out and dropped the gun, which skittered across the floor and under a table. "Help!" Sarah shouted, finally, breaking her silence. "Someone call the police!" The bar erupted into chaos. People screamed and dove for cover, not understanding what was happening but recognizing the sound of violence. Tables overturned as patrons scrambled to get away from the fight. Sarah tried to pursue the gun, but David tackled her from behind, sending them both crashing to the floor. They rolled across the sticky floor, each trying to gain the advantage. David was wounded but desperate, and Sarah was losing blood from her shoulder. She could feel her strength beginning to ebb, but she couldn't give up. Too much was at stake. Through the chaos, Sarah caught a glimpse of Marcus Chen and his contact fleeing through the back exit, the briefcase clutched in Chen's hand. The entire operation was falling apart, but at least she was still alive to report what she had learned. David managed to get on top of her, his hands closing around her throat. His face was twisted with rage and desperation, and Sarah realized he intended to finish this here and now, regardless of the witnesses. She clawed at his hands, but her vision was starting to blur from lack of oxygen and blood loss. Just as darkness began to creep in at the edges of her sight, Sarah heard the sound of running footsteps and shouting voices. Her backup team had finally realized something was wrong and was storming into the bar. David heard them too, and his grip loosened slightly as he looked up in panic. That moment of distraction was all Sarah needed. She bucked her hips upward, throwing David off balance, then rolled to the side and gasped for air. Two men in tactical gear were already moving toward them, their weapons drawn and ready. Federal agents, one of them shouted. Everyone on the ground. David tried to run, but he was surrounded. Sarah watched through blurred vision as her teammates took him down with professional efficiency. It was over, but at what cost? Chen had escaped with the documents, and their entire operation had been compromised from the beginning. As paramedics rushed to treat her wounded shoulder, Sarah tried to process everything that had happened. David had known her real name, had been watching her for weeks. That suggested a level of intelligence and planning that went far beyond anything they had anticipated. This wasn't just about Marcus Chen selling secrets, they had stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous. Agent Martinez, can you hear me? It was her handler, Agent Thompson, leaning over her as the medics worked on her wound. Chen got away, she managed to say through gritted teeth. The briefcase, he had it with him. We know. We're tracking him now. What about this guy who attacked you? Did he say anything useful? Sarah thought about David's confident smile, his casual threats, the way he had known details about her mission that should have been classified. He knew everything, she said weakly. Our whole operation, it was compromised from the start. Thompson's face darkened. What do you mean? He said they'd been watching me for 6 weeks. That I led them to our safe houses, our protocols, everything. Sarah's voice was getting weaker as the adrenaline began to wear off. This isn't just about Chen. It's bigger than that. The paramedics were loading her onto a stretcher now, preparing to transport her to the hospital. As they wheeled her toward the exit, Sarah caught sight of David being loaded into a police car. Even with his hands cuffed behind his back, he managed to turn and look at her. That predatory smile was back on his face, as if he knew something she didn't. This isn't over, he called out as the car door slammed shut. Sarah shivered despite the blanket the paramedics had wrapped around her. She had a feeling David was right. Whatever they had stumbled into tonight was just the beginning, and the real danger was still out there, waiting in the shadows. As the ambulance pulled away from O'Malley's bar, Sarah stared up at the ceiling and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. Her cover was blown, her mission had failed, and somewhere out there, Marcus Chen was delivering classified secrets to unknown enemies. But she was alive, and as long as she was breathing, she would find a way to stop them. The game had changed, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 days after the incident at O'Malley's bar, Sarah Martinez sat in a sterile hospital room, her left shoulder wrapped in white bandages that reminded her constantly of how close she had come to death. The bullet had missed any major arteries, but the wound was deeper than she had initially realized, requiring surgery and several days of observation. She was lucky to be alive, and she knew it. Agent Thompson sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her bed, a thick file folder balanced on his lap. His gray hair was more disheveled than usual, and the lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent trying to understand how their operation had gone so terribly wrong. As her handler for the past 3 years, Thompson had always been meticulous in his planning, but this time something had slipped through the cracks. The doctors say you can be discharged tomorrow, Thompson said, though his tone suggested this wasn't a social visit. But, we need to talk about what happened. Sarah shifted carefully in her bed, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate her shoulder. I told you everything in my initial debrief. David Reynolds, if that's even his real name, knew details about our operation that should have been classified at the highest levels. He'd been watching me for weeks. We ran his prints through every database we have access to, Thompson replied, opening his folder. David Reynolds doesn't exist. The identity is completely fabricated, but whoever created it did professional work. It would have fooled anyone who didn't dig too deep. What about facial recognition? Nothing. Either he's never been photographed by any law enforcement agency, or he's had extensive cosmetic surgery to alter his appearance. Thompson pulled out a photograph and handed it to Sarah. This is what he looks like now, compared to his driver's license photo. See any differences? Sarah studied the images carefully. The man who had threatened her in the bar looked exactly like his fake identification, but there was something about the bone structure around his eyes that seemed different. Subtle, but noticeable if you knew what to look for. The nose is different, she said finally. And maybe something around the cheekbones. But it's hard to be sure. Our analysts think the same thing. Professional work, probably done overseas where records are harder to track. Thompson took the photos back and filed them away. But that's not why I'm here, Sarah. We've got bigger problems. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. What kind of problems? Marcus Chen never made it home the night of the operation. His car was found abandoned on Route 95, about 50 miles outside the city. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing. He just vanished. You think David's people took him? That's one possibility. The other is that Chen got spooked and ran. Either way, we've lost our primary target and the documents he was carrying. Thompson leaned forward, his expression grave. But that's not the worst of it. Sarah waited, knowing that whatever Thompson was about to tell her would change everything. We found something in David's apartment. Well, one of his apartments. He had 3 different identities, 3 different homes, all within a 20-mile radius of your operation. Thompson pulled out another photograph, this one showing a cluttered desk covered with papers and photographs. Take a look at this. Sarah's heart sank as she studied the image. Spread across the desk were surveillance photos of her going about her daily routine as Lisa the marketing professional. Pictures of her entering and leaving her cover apartment, sitting in coffee shops, shopping for groceries. Someone had been documenting her every move with the thoroughness of a professional intelligence operation. There's more, Thompson continued, producing additional photos. Pictures of our safe house, license plate numbers of our surveillance vehicles, even photos of you and me meeting at the park last month. Jesus, Sarah whispered. How long were they watching us? Based on the timestamps on some of these photos, at least 8 weeks. They were on to us before the operation even officially began. Thompson's voice was tight with anger and frustration. Someone fed them information about our plans, Sarah. This was an inside job. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Thompson was right, it meant someone within their own organization had betrayed them. Someone with access to classified operational details had deliberately sabotaged their mission and put her life in danger. Do we have any suspects? She asked. We're working on it. The list of people who knew the full details of your operation is short, but it includes some very high-ranking officials. We're conducting discreet investigations, but we have to be careful. If we spook them all, they could disappear just like Chin did. Sarah stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything she was learning. The mission to capture Marcus Chen had been important, but it was beginning to look like they had stumbled into something much more significant. A network that could place assets in their organization, conduct extensive surveillance operations, and coordinate complex counterintelligence efforts. There's something else, Thompson said quietly. Something that might explain why they went to such lengths to compromise our operation. He pulled out a manila envelope and extracted several documents that had been heavily redacted with black marker. Even with most of the text obscured, Sarah could see that they were classified at the highest levels. These are communications we intercepted from Chen's computer before it was wiped. It took our tech people 3 days to recover them, and most of the data is corrupted, but we managed to piece together enough to get a general picture of what he was selling. Sarah took the documents and tried to make sense of what little text remained visible. She could see references to military installations, personnel records, and what appeared to be technical specifications for some kind of weapons system. It's not just random classified information, Thompson explained. Chen was selling detailed intelligence about our counter-terrorism operations overseas. Personnel files of deep cover agents, locations of safe houses, communication protocols. Everything someone would need to systematically dismantle our intelligence network in the Middle East. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. If hostile foreign powers had access to this information, it could compromise operations that had taken years to establish. Agent lives would be at risk, and entire networks of assets could be rolled up overnight. How many people could die because of this? Sarah asked. We don't know yet. We're trying to reach out to our assets, but some of them have already gone dark. 3 agents in Syria haven't reported in for over a week, and our contacts in Iraq are refusing to meet their handlers. Thompson rubbed his eyes wearily. It's a nightmare, Sarah. Years of work down the drain, and we don't even know how much damage has been done yet. Sarah felt sick. The mission she had thought was about catching one corrupt defense contractor had actually been about stopping a massive intelligence leak that could cripple American operations across an entire region. And they had failed. What about David? Has he said anything useful? Nothing. He's lawyered up and refuses to talk. His attorney claims he was just an innocent bystander who got caught up in a case of mistaken identity. Says he was only trying to help a distressed woman in a bar and got attacked for his troubles. That's ridiculous. He knew my real name, knew about the operation. Of course it's ridiculous, but without evidence we can't prove otherwise. The gun that was used in the shooting? Clean of prints and registered to a dead person. The fake identification? Professionally done but leads nowhere. This guy was a professional, Sarah. He knew exactly how to cover his tracks. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A nurse entered with a small paper cup filled with pills and a glass of water. Time for your medication, Ms. Martinez, the nurse said cheerfully. How are you feeling today? Better, thank you, Sarah replied, accepting the pills. She waited until the nurse had left before continuing her conversation with Thompson. So where does this leave us? Chen is gone, David won't talk, and we have a mole somewhere in our organization feeding information to foreign agents. What's our next move? Thompson was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the parking lot below. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully measured. That's what I came here to discuss with you. This investigation is being moved to a higher level. The director wants a joint task force with the CIA and NSA to handle the counterintelligence aspects. Your role in the operation is officially over. Sarah felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. What do you mean, my role is over? I'm the one who was there. I'm the one who can identify these people. You're going to sideline me because I got shot? It's not about you getting shot, Sarah. It's about the fact that your cover is blown and your identity is compromised. These people know who you are, where you live, probably where your family lives. You're a liability now. I'm an asset, Sarah shot back. I've seen their faces, heard their voices. I know how they operate. You know how one of them operates, and he's already in custody. The network is bigger than just David Reynolds, and they've proven they can infiltrate our organization at the highest levels. The director thinks it's too dangerous to keep you involved. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. Since when do we let the bad guys dictate our operational decisions? If they want me out of the picture badly enough to compromise an entire operation, that tells me I'm on the right track. Or it tells me they've identified you as a threat and will stop at nothing to eliminate you." Thompson leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, I've worked with you for 3 years. You're one of the best agents I've ever supervised, but this is different. This isn't some terrorist cell operating out of a cave somewhere. This is a sophisticated intelligence operation with resources and reach we're only beginning to understand. All the more reason to use every advantage we have. I can recognize David if he escapes custody. I know his mannerisms, his voice, the way he thinks. That's intelligence you can't get from surveillance photos or computer databases." Thompson sighed deeply. "I told the director you'd say that. Hell, I even argued your case for 2 hours yesterday. But the decision has been made. You're being reassigned to a desk job in the Washington office while this investigation continues." "A desk job?" Sarah couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. "Tom, you know I'm not built for pushing papers around an office. I need to be in the field." "I know, and I'm sorry. But right now, the field is too dangerous for you. These people have already tried to kill you once. If we give them another opportunity, they might succeed." Sarah stared at her hands, trying to control her emotions. She understood Thompson's concerns, and she knew the director's decision was probably based on sound security principles. But the thought of sitting behind a desk while the people who had tried to kill her continued their operations was almost unbearable. "What if I refuse the transfer?" she asked quietly. "Then, you'll be suspended pending a fitness evaluation. The director was very clear about that." Thompson's voice softened. "Sarah, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but sometimes discretion really is the better part of valor. Let the task force handle this investigation. When it's over, when these people are behind bars, you can go back to field work. And how long will that take? Months? Years? By the time this is resolved, I'll have lost all my edge. I'll be starting over from scratch. Maybe. Or maybe you'll have learned something valuable about patience and strategy. Not every battle has to be fought head-on, Sarah. Sometimes the best way to win is to step back and let your enemies make mistakes." Sarah knew Thompson was right, intellectually, but emotionally she wanted to fight. The people who had tried to kill her were still out there, still operating, still putting American lives at risk. The idea of walking away while they continued their work felt like surrender. "When do I have to report to Washington?" she asked finally. "Monday. That gives you 4 days to recover and get your affairs in order here." Thompson stood up and gathered his files. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. This isn't how any of us wanted this to end." After Thompson left, Sarah lay in her hospital bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. The official investigation would proceed through proper channels, following protocol and building legal cases that would hold up in court. But protocols and legal cases took time, and time was something those compromised agents overseas might not have. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah glanced at it expecting to see something from her family or friends, but the number was unfamiliar. "Sorry about your shoulder. Next time aim higher." Sarah's blood ran cold. David was in federal custody, supposedly being held in isolation pending charges. There was no way he should have been able to send a text message, let alone obtain her personal phone number. Which meant either he had help from inside the prison system, or the message hadn't come from David at all. She stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and turned off her phone. Thompson was right about one thing: this network was bigger and more sophisticated than they had realized. But he was wrong about something else. Sarah wasn't going to step back and let her enemies make mistakes. She was going to make some mistakes of her own, the kind that might just give her the advantage she needed to bring these people down. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah was already making plans. The official investigation might be out of her hands, but that didn't mean she was powerless. She had contacts, resources, and skills that existed outside the official channels. And she had something else that might prove even more valuable. She had nothing left to lose. The game was far from over. In fact, Sarah was beginning to suspect it had barely begun. 2 weeks after being reassigned to a desk in the Washington headquarters, Sarah Martinez had already violated 6 different federal regulations and at least 3 laws. She sat in her cramped office on the 7th floor, officially reviewing budget reports for overseas operations, but actually using her high-level security clearance to access files that had nothing to do with her current assignment. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she scrolled through personnel records, looking for any connection between the people who had known about her operation and the mysterious network that had tried to kill her. Her shoulders still ached when she moved wrong, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the frustration of being stuck behind a desk while the real action continued without her. On her computer screen, she had pulled up the file of everyone who had access to the details of her undercover operation. 7 people in total, including Thompson and herself. 5 others who could have leaked information to David Reynolds and his associates. 5 potential traitors who were going about their daily business while American agents overseas continued to disappear. Sarah had spent the past 2 weeks building profiles of each suspect, using every database she could access and calling in favors from contacts throughout the intelligence community. What she had discovered made her increasingly certain that the mole was someone she had worked with before, someone who knew her well enough to predict her movements and reactions. Her phone rang, interrupting her research. The caller ID showed Thompson's number. "Martinez," she answered. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come to my office?" Something in Thompson's tone made Sarah pause. He sounded tired and stressed, but there was something else. Fear, maybe, or disappointment. "I'll be right there," she said, quickly closing the files on her computer and locking her workstation. Thompson's office was 3 floors up and twice the size of Sarah's cubbyhole, with windows that looked out over the Potomac River. When Sarah arrived, she found him standing by those windows with his back to the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Close the door and have a seat," he said without turning around. Sarah did as instructed, settling into one of the leather chairs across from Thompson's desk. She had been in this office dozens of times over the years, but today it felt different. Colder somehow, and more formal. Thompson finally turned to face her, and Sarah was shocked by his appearance. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the 2 weeks since she had seen him at the hospital. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, and his eyes held a haunted quality that she had never seen before. "David Reynolds escaped from federal custody 3 days ago," Thompson said without preamble. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. How is that possible? He was being held in maximum security. Someone on the inside helped him. The guard on duty that night was found unconscious in a supply closet. The security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned for exactly 18 minutes. By the time anyone realized what had happened, David was gone. "Do we have any leads?" Thompson sat down heavily in his chair and pulled out a file folder that looked disturbingly familiar. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. The FBI found evidence in David's cell that suggests he had inside information about our security protocols. Detailed information about shift changes, camera locations, even the layout of the facility. Information that someone on the inside gave him." "Exactly. But here's the thing, Sarah. The list of people who had access to that information is very short. And you're on it." The accusation hit Sarah like a slap in the face. She stared at Thompson, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You think I helped David escape? Tom, are you insane? He tried to kill me." "I know how it sounds, but I have to ask. The investigators found something else in his cell." Thompson opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. "A picture of you taken last week outside your apartment building in Washington. The timestamp shows it was taken 2 days before David's escape." Sarah's mind reeled. The photograph showed her clearly, walking from her car to the entrance of her building. But she had been careful to watch for surveillance, had followed all the protocols for someone whose identity had been compromised. How had someone gotten close enough to photograph her without her noticing? This proves I'm being stalked, not that I'm working with them, she said. Maybe. Or maybe it proves you were meeting with them to plan David's escape. Thompson's voice was flat, professional, and it broke Sarah's heart to hear him speak to her like a suspect instead of a trusted colleague. Tom, you know me. You've worked with me for 3 years. Do you really think I would betray my country? Betray my fellow agents? For a moment, Thompson's professional mask slipped and she saw genuine pain in his eyes. I don't want to think that, Sarah. But the evidence is piling up, and it all points in your direction. What evidence? A photograph that proves I'm being watched? That's evidence of my innocence, not my guilt. Thompson pulled out more documents from his folder. The timing of David's information about your operation. The fact that he knew details that were only shared with a handful of people. The convenient way you managed to survive an encounter that should have killed you. Convenient? Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. I have a bullet scar to prove how close I came to dying. A flesh wound that could have been staged. A way to establish your credibility while allowing the real targets to escape. Thompson looked miserable as he spoke, but he continued methodically laying out the case against her. And now David escapes just when the investigation was starting to focus on the mole in our organization. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane, Tom. You know me better than this. I thought I did. But the Sarah Martinez I know wouldn't have violated security protocols to access files she has no business reading. The Sarah Martinez I know wouldn't have used her clearance to run unauthorized background checks on her colleagues. Sarah's heart sank. Somehow they had discovered her private investigation. I was trying to find the mole. Or you were trying to stay ahead of our investigation into you. Thompson stood up as well, and Sarah could see the pain this conversation was causing him. Sarah, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you involved with David Reynolds and his network? No, Sarah said firmly. I am not now, nor have I ever been, involved with foreign agents or hostile intelligence services. I took an oath to defend this country, and I have never violated that oath. Thompson stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the internal battle playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he sat back down and gestured for her to do the same. I believe you, he said quietly. But it doesn't matter what I believe. The director has ordered an investigation into your activities, and Internal Affairs is taking over your case. You're being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of their inquiry. How long will that take? Months, probably. Maybe longer if they don't find what they're looking for quickly. Thompson looked exhausted. Sarah, I need you to turn in your badge and weapon. Security will escort you out of the building. The finality of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her career, everything she had worked for over the past decade, was being destroyed by people who were using her own organization against her. David Reynolds and his network had found a way to neutralize her without firing a single shot. They're winning, she said softly. What? David and his people. They've managed to turn my own agency against me. While we're wasting time and resources investigating me, they're continuing their operations. More agents are going to die because we're chasing the wrong leads. Thompson was quiet for a moment. Then, he leaned forward and lowered his voice. Officially, I can't give you any advice. But, unofficially, if I were in your position, I might consider taking some vacation time. Maybe visit some old friends. People who might be willing to help with unofficial research projects. Sarah met his eyes and saw the message he was trying to convey. Thompson couldn't officially support her, but he wasn't going to stop her from conducting her own investigation outside the system. It was dangerous for both of them, but it might be the only way to find the truth. I understand, she said. 20 minutes later, Sarah walked out of the federal building with her personal belongings in a cardboard box and her service weapon locked in an evidence locker. She had been officially branded a suspected traitor, cut off from the resources and support system that had defined her adult life. But, as she drove away from headquarters, Sarah felt something unexpected: relief. For the first time in weeks, she was free to act without worrying about regulations and protocols. She could pursue leads that would be deemed too dangerous or politically sensitive for an official investigation. She could take risks that no government agency would ever approve. Her phone buzzed with another text from the same unknown number that had contacted her in the hospital. "Enjoying your new career? This is just the beginning." Sarah pulled over and stared at the message for a long moment. Then, she typed a reply: "Looking forward to finishing what we started." She sent the message and, then, turned off her phone. David Reynolds thought he had won by destroying her career and turning her own agency against her. But, he had actually done something much more dangerous: he had set her free. Sarah drove to her apartment and spent the next 2 hours packing everything she might need for an extended trip. Clothes, cash, fake identification documents she had acquired years ago for deep cover operations, and a collection of weapons that weren't registered with any government agency. If Internal Affairs wanted to investigate her as a suspected traitor, they would find an empty apartment and a cold trail. That evening, Sarah drove to a small diner outside Baltimore where she had arranged to meet someone who could help her disappear completely. Jake Morrison was a former military intelligence officer who had left the service under circumstances that were never fully explained. Now he ran a private security company that specialized in projects that governments couldn't officially acknowledge. Sarah found Jake sitting in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee and reading a newspaper. He was a big man with prematurely gray hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. They had worked together on 2 operations overseas, and Sarah trusted him more than most of her official colleagues. "You look terrible," Jake said as she slid into the booth across from him. "Thanks for the pep talk. I need your help. I figured that out when you called. Sarah Martinez doesn't typically reach out for social visits." Jake folded his newspaper and studied her face. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Sarah spent the next 30 minutes explaining everything that had happened, from the failed operation at O'Malley's bar to her suspension from the agency. Jake listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just absorbing the information. "So let me get this straight," Jake said when she finished. "You've been framed by a network of foreign agents who have a mole inside your organization. Your own agency thinks you're the mole. And now you want to go off the reservation and hunt down these people yourself. That's about the size of it." Jake was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "It's crazy enough to work. Or crazy enough to get you killed. Probably both. Will you help me? What exactly are you asking for?" "Resources. Information. A way to move around without being tracked by either the good guys or the bad guys." Sarah leaned forward. "Jake, there are American agents dying overseas because of what these people stole. I can't just walk away. Even if it costs you everything? I've already lost everything that matters. My career is over. My reputation is destroyed. The only thing I have left is the chance to stop these bastards before they do any more damage." Jake nodded slowly. "Okay. I'm in. But we do this my way, with my rules. No cowboy stuff, no unnecessary risks. We gather intelligence first, then we plan our moves carefully." "Agreed. Good. First thing we need to do is establish a secure base of operations. Somewhere off the grid where we can work without interference." Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I know a place upstate. Remote, defensible, and completely invisible to electronic surveillance." Sarah felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. She wasn't alone anymore, and she had resources that David Reynolds couldn't predict or counter. The official investigation might be stalled, but the real hunt was just beginning. "There's something else," Jake said as they prepared to leave the diner. "If we're going to do this right, we need to assume that everything you've told your handlers has been compromised. Every safe house, every contact, every protocol. We start fresh and trust no one." "Understood. And, Sarah? Once we start down this path, there's no going back. If we're wrong about the mole, if the evidence really does point to you, then we'll both be fugitives. Are you sure you're ready for that? Sarah thought about the agents who were missing overseas, about David Reynolds and his confident smile, about the network of enemies who thought they had neutralized her. She thought about everything she was giving up and everything she might lose. I'm ready, she said. As they walked out into the cold night air, Sarah felt the weight of her decision settling around her like a heavy coat. She was about to become everything her former colleagues would soon believe she was, a rogue agent operating outside the law, pursuing her own agenda without oversight or accountability. The difference was that her agenda was justice, and she would pursue it no matter what the cost. The cabin Jake Morrison had led her to was exactly what he had promised, completely off the grid and invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, it was accessible only by a narrow dirt road that looked more like a hiking trail than anything meant for vehicles. Solar panels provided minimal electricity, and a wood stove supplied heat. There was no internet, no landline phone, and no cell tower coverage for 20 miles in any direction. For the past 3 weeks, Sarah had been living like a hermit, growing out her hair and letting her natural auburn color replace the brown dye she had been using for her undercover work. She spent her days poring over files that Jake had obtained through his network of former military and intelligence contacts, building a comprehensive picture of the network that had tried to kill her. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's small windows as Sarah sat at the wooden table that served as her makeshift command center, surrounded by photographs, documents, and timeline charts she had created by hand. Every piece of evidence was arranged according to a pattern that was finally starting to make sense. Jake had left before dawn to make another supply run and check in with his contacts in Washington. These trips were risky, but they were the only way to gather fresh intelligence about the official investigation and David Reynolds' activities since his escape. Sarah had argued for going with him, but Jake had been firm. Her face was too well known, and the manhunt for David had expanded to include her as a person of interest in his escape. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 months ago she had been one of the government's most trusted operatives. Now she was being hunted by the same people she had devoted her career to serving, while the real traitors continued their work unimpeded. A sound outside made Sarah freeze. Jake wasn't supposed to be back for hours, and they had agreed that any unexpected visitors meant immediate evacuation to the emergency hideout deeper in the mountains. Sarah quickly gathered the most sensitive documents and moved to the window, trying to see what had triggered her instincts. Through the trees, she caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was approaching the cabin on foot, moving carefully through the underbrush. Sarah counted at least 3 figures, possibly more, all wearing dark clothing and moving with the coordinated precision of trained operatives. Sarah's heart raced as she grabbed her backpack and the emergency communication device Jake had given her. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached the cabin, maybe less. The documents scattered across the table would have to be destroyed. She couldn't risk them falling into enemy hands. She was reaching for the matches to start burning the papers when she heard a familiar voice calling out. "Sarah! It's Tom Thompson. I'm alone, and I need to talk to you." Sarah hesitated, her hand frozen inches from the matches. Thompson's voice was definitely genuine, but that didn't mean he was actually alone or that this wasn't a trap. The figures she had seen moving through the trees suggested otherwise. "I know you're in there," Thompson continued. "And I know you're probably planning to run. But I have information you need to hear. Information about David Reynolds and the real reason you were targeted." Against every instinct and protocol Jake had drilled into her, Sarah moved to the door. Something in Thompson's tone suggested desperation rather than deception. She had worked with him for 3 years, and she had never known him to lie to her, even when the truth was painful. "Are you alone?" she called out through the closed door. "I brought a tactical team for security, but they're maintaining a perimeter." "I knew you wouldn't talk to me if I came alone. Too risky for both of us." Sarah considered her options. She could escape through the back window and disappear into the mountains, but that would mean abandoning everything she had learned and starting over from scratch. Or she could trust the man who had been like a father to her and hope that he was still on her side. "I'm going to open the door," she said. "But I'm armed, and if this is a trap, people are going to get hurt. Understood. Sarah unlocked the door and stepped back, her pistol drawn and ready. Thompson entered slowly, his hands visible and empty. He looked even worse than he had during their last meeting at headquarters, thinner, more haggard, and carrying himself like a man who had been bearing too much weight for too long. "You can put the gun down, Sarah. I'm not here to arrest you." "Then, why are you here?" Thompson looked around the cabin, taking in the extensive research materials and timeline charts. "Because I think I know who the real mole is, and we don't have much time to stop them." Sarah didn't lower her weapon. "Talk." "David Reynolds surfaced 2 days ago in Prague. Czech intelligence photographed him meeting with a Russian handler in a park near the city center. They shared the intel with us as a courtesy, but by the time our people arrived, both men were gone." "What does that have to do with the mole?" "The meeting was set up through an encrypted communication that originated from inside our Washington headquarters. Someone with high-level access sent David the location and time for the rendezvous." Thompson moved closer to the table, studying Sarah's research materials. The communication was traced to a terminal that only 7 people have access to. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "The same 7 people who knew about my operation." "Exactly. But here's the interesting part, the message was sent at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Security cameras show only one person in the building at that time." "Who?" "Assistant Director Patricia Vance." The name hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Patricia Vance was one of the most respected officers in the intelligence community, a 25-year veteran who had worked her way up from field agent to one of the most powerful positions in the agency. She had been Sarah's mentor during her early years, and Sarah had always looked up to her as an example of what a dedicated intelligence officer could achieve. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "Patricia Vance is above suspicion. She's been investigated and cleared for the highest levels of security access multiple times." "I thought so too. But the evidence is compelling." Thompson pulled out a tablet computer and showed Sarah a series of photographs. These were taken by surveillance cameras in Prague. "Look at the Russian handler David was meeting with." Sarah studied the grainy images. The man was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to power. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but there was something familiar about his profile. "I don't recognize him," she said. "Look at this one." Thompson swiped to a clearer photograph that showed the man's face in profile. "Our facial recognition software identified him as Colonel Dmitry Volkov, a senior intelligence officer with the SVR. But that's not the interesting part." Thompson swiped to another image, this one showing Volkov at what appeared to be a diplomatic reception. He was wearing a formal military uniform and standing next to a woman in an elegant evening gown. The woman he's with is Elena Volkov, listed as his wife in Russian diplomatic records. But look more closely at her face. Sarah leaned in to study the photograph, and her blood ran cold. The woman had different hair color and style, and her facial features had been subtly altered, probably through cosmetic surgery. But the bone structure, the way she carried herself, even the slight scar near her left temple that Sarah had always assumed was from a childhood accident, it was definitely Patricia Vance. "Jesus," Sarah whispered. "Elena Volkov has been married to Colonel Volkov for 15 years, according to Russian records. But Patricia Vance has been working for our agency for 25 years. Which means she's been a double agent for more than half her career." Sarah sank into a chair, trying to process the implications. Patricia Vance had access to some of the most sensitive intelligence in the American government. She had been involved in planning and oversight of countless operations, had access to the identities and locations of deep cover agents around the world. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked. "I started putting it together after David's escape. The timing of his inside information, the way certain operations seemed to go wrong at exactly the wrong moment, the fact that our agents overseas started disappearing right after Patricia was briefed on their locations." Thompson sat down across from her. "I've been conducting my own investigation for the past 2 weeks, completely off the books. Does anyone else know? Not yet. I needed to be absolutely certain before I made any accusations. Patricia Vance isn't just any suspect, she's one of the most powerful people in the intelligence community. Accusing her of treason without ironclad proof would destroy my career and probably get me charged with conduct unbecoming. But you have proof now. Some. The communication logs, the surveillance photos, pattern analysis of compromised operations. It's enough to convince me, but maybe not enough to convince a court or a review board. Sarah looked at her timeline charts with new understanding. She's the one who recommended me for the Marcus Chen operation. She knew I would be thorough, that I would gather detailed intelligence about our safe houses and protocols. She probably planned for me to be killed in that bar, along with all the operational knowledge I had accumulated. Which would have closed off that line of investigation while making it look like the network had been disrupted by your death. Thompson nodded grimly. Instead, you survived and became a loose end they needed to eliminate. So they framed me for working with David Reynolds. Destroyed my credibility so that even if I figured out the truth, no one would believe me. It's a perfect setup. You're the scapegoat for all the compromised operations. Patricia continues working as a double agent, and David Reynolds disappears back into whatever hole he crawled out of. Sarah stood up and began pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. We have to stop her. If Patricia really is Elena Volkov, she has access to intelligence that could compromise every operation we're running globally. I know. But she's too well protected. Any official move against her would have to go through channels she controls or influences. She would know we were coming long before we could build a case. Then, we don't go through official channels. Thompson looked at her sharply. Sarah, what are you thinking? I'm thinking about all the agents who have died because of her betrayal. I'm thinking about the operations that have failed, the intelligence that has been stolen, the damage she's done to national security over the past 15 years. Sarah stopped pacing and met Thompson's eyes. I'm thinking that sometimes justice requires action outside the system. That's a dangerous path. If you're wrong, if there's another explanation for the evidence, then we'll be the ones in prison instead of her. But, Tom, you know as well as I do that the evidence is solid. Patricia Vance is Elena Volkov, and she's been selling American secrets to the Russians for over a decade. Thompson was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs of Patricia and her Russian handler husband. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with resignation and determination. What do you need from me? Access. Patricia has to have some way of communicating with her handlers that doesn't go through official channels. Maybe a safe house, maybe dead drop locations, maybe just regular meetings disguised as social events. We need to catch her in the act. I can get you her personal schedule, her travel records, maybe even access to her financial information if I'm careful about it. What about surveillance? If we can document her meeting with Russian contacts, that would be enough to prove treason. That's more difficult. Official surveillance would require warrants and oversight. Unofficial surveillance would be illegal and inadmissible in court. Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Tom, I'm already wanted as a suspected traitor. A little illegal surveillance isn't going to make my situation any worse. But it could make mine worse. If I'm caught helping you, then don't get caught. Feed me the information through back channels, and make sure you have plausible deniability for everything. Sarah began gathering her research materials. How long do we have before Patricia realizes you're investigating her? Not long. She's already asking questions about my recent activities. I think she suspects I'm not buying the official story about your involvement with David Reynolds. Then, we move fast. Set up the intelligence transfer for tomorrow night, and I'll start surveillance immediately. Thompson stood up and moved toward the door, then paused. Sarah, if we do this, there's no going back. We'll both be outside the system, operating without any legal authority or protection. We've been outside the system since the moment Patricia decided to frame me for her crimes. The only difference is that now we're fighting back. After Thompson left with his security team, Sarah spent the rest of the day preparing for what might be the most important operation of her career. She cleaned and checked her weapons, organized her equipment, and reviewed everything she knew about Patricia Vance's habits and routines. As the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. For the first time since the disaster at O'Malley's bar, she was moving from defense to offense. Patricia Vance had destroyed her career and nearly gotten her killed, but now the hunter was about to become the hunted. Sarah packed her gear and prepared to leave the mountain hideout that had been her sanctuary for 3 weeks. Tomorrow night, she would begin the most dangerous mission of her life, exposing a traitor who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of deception. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure would mean not just her own death, but the continued compromise of American intelligence operations around the world. But, as Sarah loaded her pistol and checked her surveillance equipment one last time, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The truth was finally within her grasp, and she was ready to risk everything to seize it. The Georgetown mansion sat behind iron gates and mature oak trees, a testament to the kind of wealth and influence that came with 25 years of government service at the highest levels. Sarah crouched in the shadows across the street, watching through night vision binoculars as Patricia Vance moved around inside her home office on the second floor. It was 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday night, and Patricia was supposed to be alone. Her official schedule showed no appointments, no social events, no reason to be awake and active at this hour. But intelligence Thompson had gathered suggested that Patricia, or Elena Volkov, as Sarah now thought of her, conducted her most sensitive communications during these late-night hours when surveillance was least likely. Sarah had been watching the house for 3 days, documenting Patricia's routines and looking for patterns that would reveal her true activities. What she had discovered was troubling. Patricia received visitors at odd hours, always the same black sedan with diplomatic plates that arrived and departed through the back alley. The meetings were brief, usually less than 30 minutes, and always involved the exchange of briefcases or manila envelopes. Tonight felt different, though. Patricia had been pacing in her office for over an hour, occasionally speaking on what appeared to be a satellite phone. Her body language suggested stress, urgency, maybe even fear. Something important was happening. Sarah's own satellite phone vibrated with a text message from Thompson. Emergency briefing called for 0600 tomorrow. Patricia requested it. Subject unknown. Be careful. Sarah typed back, understood. Anything else? David Reynolds spotted in D.C. yesterday. Maybe planning something big. The news made Sarah's blood run cold. If David was back in Washington at the same time Patricia was conducting urgent late-night communications, it suggested their network was preparing for a major operation. Sarah needed to find out what they were planning, and she needed to find out tonight. She was considering her options for getting closer to the house when the black sedan appeared again, pulling into the back alley just as it had on the previous 3 nights. But, this time, 2 men got out instead of 1, and Sarah recognized the second figure immediately even in the dim light. David Reynolds was walking up to Patricia Vance's back door like he owned the place. Sarah's finger found the trigger of the high-powered camera she had borrowed from Jake's equipment cache. She began shooting photographs rapidly, documenting David's arrival and his apparently comfortable relationship with one of the most powerful people in American intelligence. This was the evidence they needed to prove the conspiracy, but it also meant Sarah was witnessing what might be the planning session for whatever operation they were preparing. Through her night vision scope, Sarah watched Patricia open the back door and embrace David like an old friend. They disappeared into the house together, but she could still see their shadows moving around in the office upstairs. Sarah needed to get closer, to hear what they were discussing, but the house was too well protected for a direct approach. That's when she remembered something from her surveillance of the previous days. The house next door was undergoing renovation and had been empty all week. If she could get inside, she might be able to use the shared wall to monitor Patricia's office. Sarah gathered her equipment and moved carefully through the shadows, avoiding the streetlights and security cameras she had identified during her reconnaissance. The construction site was protected only by a chain-link fence and some warning signs. For someone with Sarah's training, it might as well have been a welcome mat. She was inside the abandoned house within 2 minutes, moving carefully through rooms filled with construction debris and plastic sheeting. The stairs to the second floor creaked ominously, but she managed to find a route that minimized the noise. From the master bedroom, she could hear voices coming through the shared wall. Sarah pressed a small electronic listening device against the wall and put on headphones. Patricia's voice came through clearly, speaking in what sounded like fluent Russian. "The operation must proceed as scheduled," Patricia was saying. "We've invested too much time and resources to abort now." "The situation has changed," David replied, also in Russian. "The Martinez woman is still alive and active. My sources tell me she's been conducting her own investigation." "Your sources also told you she would be eliminated in Prague. Clearly your network isn't as reliable as you claimed." Sarah felt a chill. They were talking about an operation in Prague, the same city where David had been photographed meeting with Colonel Volkov. Had there been an attempt on her life that she didn't even know about? "My people traced her to that mountain hideout, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. Someone warned her." "Thompson," Patricia said with disgust. "I should have eliminated him weeks ago. His loyalty to Martinez makes him unpredictable. It doesn't matter now. The important thing is that Martinez doesn't have enough evidence to prove anything. Even if she suspects you, she can't act on it. You underestimate her. Sarah Martinez is one of the most capable operatives I've ever worked with. If she's focusing on me, she'll find a way to prove I'm compromised." Sarah felt a perverse pride at Patricia's assessment, even as she listened to the woman who had been her mentor discuss her elimination. "Then, we accelerate the timeline," David said. "The Washington operation happens tomorrow instead of next week." "Impossible. We haven't finished identifying all the targets. We have enough. The primary targets are confirmed: the CIA station chiefs for Eastern Europe and the Middle East, the NSA liaison to the Pentagon, and the State Department's intelligence coordinator. For people who know enough to compromise our entire network if they compare notes." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized what she was hearing. Patricia and David were planning assassinations, targeting senior American intelligence officers who might be close to discovering their activities. 4 people were going to die tomorrow unless Sarah could find a way to stop them. "The methods are in place?" Patricia asked. "Car bombs for 2 of them, staged to look like terrorist attacks. A poisoning for the 3rd, he has a known heart condition, so cardiac arrest will be believable. The 4th will be a simple robbery gone wrong. And the evidence pointing to foreign involvement? Already planted. When the FBI investigates, they'll find communications linking the attacks to Iranian agents. The administration will have their excuse for the military response they've been looking for." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Not only were they planning to murder 4 senior intelligence officers, but they were setting up Iran to take the blame, potentially triggering a war that would benefit Russian interests in the region. "What about Martinez?" David continued. "She could still interfere. Not if she's dead. I've arranged for a team to intercept her tomorrow morning. She's been investigating my finances. Thompson gave her access to information she shouldn't have. When my security detail discovers her conducting surveillance on my home, they'll be justified in using lethal force." Sarah realized with horror that she was listening to her own death warrant being signed. Patricia had planned everything perfectly. Sarah would be killed while conducting illegal surveillance, painting her as a rogue agent whose death was justified. Meanwhile, the 4 assassinations would proceed as scheduled, and Patricia would continue her work as a Russian agent embedded at the highest levels of American intelligence. "The timeline is tight," David said. "My people need to be in position by 0600. They will be. I've already provided the target schedules and security details. Everything will happen between 0700 and 0900, during the morning rush when casualties can be blamed on random violence." Sarah had heard enough. She needed to get this information to Thompson immediately, but she also needed to escape before Patricia's security team arrived to kill her. According to what she had just heard, she had perhaps 6 hours before the assassinations began. She was carefully packing her surveillance equipment when she heard Patricia's voice again, closer now. They had moved downstairs and were heading toward the back door.
Confirm the Martinez termination at 0530, Patricia was saying.
I want her dead before she can interfere with the main operation.
Understood. My team is already in position.
Sarah froze.
If David's team was already in position, it meant they were watching the construction site right now.
She was trapped. Through the window, Sarah could see David and Patricia standing by the black sedan, speaking in low tones. Patricia handed David what looked like a thick envelope, and he passed her a small electronic device. The exchange took less than 30 seconds, but Sarah managed to photograph it through her night vision scope. After David drove away, Patricia stood in her backyard for a moment, looking around as if sensing she was being watched. Sarah held her breath, pressing herself against the wall and hoping the darkness would conceal her position. Patricia finally went back inside, but Sarah knew she couldn't wait much longer. If David's team was already in position to kill her at 5:30 a.m., she had less than 6 hours to escape and warn her targets about the planned assassinations. Sarah began moving toward the back of the house, avoiding the windows and trying to stay in the deepest shadows. She needed to reach the rear fence without being spotted by whoever might be watching the property. From there, she could disappear into the network of alleys and side streets she had mapped during her reconnaissance. She was halfway to the fence when she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. Someone was moving through the construction debris, trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. Sarah dropped to a crouch and turned around, her pistol already in her hand. A figure in dark clothing was silhouetted against the lighter background of the house, moving carefully but confidently through the abandoned rooms. Sarah couldn't see his face, but his movements suggested military training and familiarity with night operations. Sarah had two choices: try to hide and hope he passed by, or confront him before he could report her position to his teammates. Given that her life expectancy was already measured in hours, she chose the more aggressive option. "Federal agent," she whispered, loud enough for him to hear but not loud enough to carry to any other watchers.
"Drop your weapon and put your hands where I can see them."
The figure froze for a moment, then slowly raised his hands.
"Don't shoot," he said quietly. "I'm not armed."
Something about his voice was familiar, but Sarah couldn't place it in the darkness. "Turn around slowly and keep your hands visible." When he turned, Sarah nearly dropped her weapon in surprise. The man facing her was Marcus Chen, the defense contractor whose betrayal had started this entire nightmare 3 months ago.
"Hello, Agent Martinez," Chen said calmly. "I think